What up? What up?
What's up, dog?
Yeah, it's going down.
How you doing on this beautiful Wednesday?
Man, running like a chicken with his head cut off, but it's the normal, right?
I
It's the
feel
normal.
that.
We gonna
Yeah,
make it do what
I
it
feel. I
do.
feel that. I feel that for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I gotta be honest, man. That's been life lately, and the more people I talk to, the more I feel like it's life for a lot of people right now. Just shit's hectic and sketchy and just constant, you know.
man, I got like 15 different capes in my closet, man. I don't know which one I got on right now.
I believe we just hit the swear word filter in like 45 seconds, so I'm doing horrible with that. I gotta be honest. Yeah,
Man,
I think I just swore a minute ago, and I'm
man,
doing terrible
hey,
with that.
look,
I got to be honest with
we can start over, man. We only got 3 people in. We can start over.
you. It's all good.
All
It's all good. It's going to be one of those things where, like, inevitably, I think they're going to flag a lot of stuff for that. And then I think there's going to be a point where they're going to move on and realize, it's like, look, you can't put 18 and up on everything that has a single swear word in it. And it just
No,
seems
for sure.
so trivial,
For sure.
like, I
And
don't
then
know.
the problem is the algorithm is so wonky. You can't even really get a feed or a feel on what you can and cannot do, because every other week is a different flag.
But the thing is, like, especially when we get into like Instagram's, moderation and like the problem is they don't have anybody to talk to. Like if there were legitimately somebody you could chat with and be like, "Hey, tell me what I did wrong," or if it were consistent across the board.
Right.
Like that's the other problem is like you'll make a post and you'll make the same post the same way for 6 months. And then suddenly that exact same post gets flagged.
Gets flagged.
And you're just like, what did I
Yeah.
do differently today that I haven't done the last year,
It's definitely a game. I was actually having a discussion today with the individual about which platform should I use versus YouTube or Instagram, and everybody keeps saying YouTube. So, and I don't know what we're doing, man. We got enough followers between you and I on YouTube to take it to YouTube. I don't know why we just won't do it.
Well, it's just because here's the thing is like the way that the reason I keep doing it here is because we have collectively more followers here,
Mhm.
right? But the problem is we're only getting a handful of people each week, and it's just because they're not really promoting us, like we're
Yeah.
not getting pushed in the algorithm, so like random people aren't seeing our feed and like like stuff like that, and it's like we probably would be better off switching to YouTube, but the reality is when we do that, we need to upgrade. So we need to like be doing, we both need to be having cameras and mics and like, there needs to be a little bit of an upgrade in quality too.
Yep.
But like, and then the other thing is the thing I like about doing these is I don't have to edit them. I don't have to pay somebody to edit them. We just do it off the cuff. We do it
Yeah.
live. It's usually a great, a great conversation. And it's like, as long as everybody stays within the lines, it doesn't say anything ridiculous or, anything that we have to take out. It's like, just shoot it live and do it in one take. It's like more authentic. People get a better feel for who you are and who I am versus if we're just slicing it up and just, putting out edited copies of whatever we want. And that's really what you have to do to like compete with YouTube is you have to become a production company. You
Well,
have to become like,
not
you have to take it
necessarily,
serious.
man, because for instance, I'll give you her name's Tasha K. Shout out Tasha K if you ever see this. I don't want no smoke with you. But yeah, Tasha K, she does YouTube every week, bro. She'll have like 5,000 people watching live. You know what I mean? There's no editing or nothing. She just goes for what she knows. Now she does have a sub content page where I think she does Bigo and Tasha K Live and stuff like that. But yeah, man, YouTube is probably
Yeah,
where it's
and
at.
it's good to be honest. It's easier to monetize that way too. I hate that we're wasting time with this, but it's easier to monetize that way too because then you can set up like with Patreon, and then once you get like you're putting out legit content, then what you can do is get people to pay for like early release videos or unedited videos or like stuff you can't do on YouTube. Eventually it'd be nice to get to do some grow shit, but it's like that's another one of those things where I'm super cautious about just like pushing bunches of pictures of plant. Like this is just two dudes having a conversation,
Right.
right? And I kind of go with the Joe Rogan theory in that if he could get away with two dudes just having a conversation, then we should be able to get away with two dudes having a conversation. Like we're not talking about anything ridiculously radical.
No.
We're not talking about anything particularly flag worthy. Like most of these conversations are just about about weed. The only problem with Vimeo is like Vimeo is not as popular. Somebody just mentioned Vimeo, and I've done a couple podcasts on other people's platforms on Vimeo, and it's a legit it's a legit platform. I just don't. It's the same reason we keep using Instagram. It's just the user base numbers.
Yeah.
It's like nobody would be on Instagram if they didn't have the user base. It's like nobody would be fucking with YouTube if they didn't have the biggest user base on the planet. So it's like that's the reason
Everybody,
we put up with the headache.
everybody watches a YouTube video. Everybody most likely has a YouTube. But we digress. That's not what the show's about, man. The show's about, end of flower.
Yes. So
Putting in
this
work.
week, I figured this week, man, we can kind of pick up on kind of a similar thing we did last week. So last week we kind of did, kind of harvest in a nutshell, right? Wasn't that last week?
Yeah.
Oh, flush. That's what it was. It was flushing. And
Harvest.
so I kind of figured there's a lot more there we can kind of touch on in determining ripeness, which is when I look at like the top 10 things that people screw up the most consistently, new growers, older growers, the one thing that I see more people making mistakes with is probably when to pick, like when to select. And then kind of prepping to that moment, what you need to do to actually get a decent harvest down, and then finishing. Now, kind of the first thing we need to talk about, right, is what is your end goal? Because if you're harvesting and your goal is fresh frozen, and you're about to make live rosin or you're about to make live resin, then your harvest and your finishing process is going to be significantly different than somebody who's trimming the whole garden and it's all going to flower.
Right.
Significantly.
Agreed.
So, that's kind of something we could touch on across the way as we go, because I have a ton of experience in in kind of every way you can prep a plant to get ready to harvest.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead.
So, speaking to your experience, all I know is from the home grower base, right? You've grown in multiple commercial gardens and ran multi-million-dollar operations, right? Is it a different time for harvest in a commercial sized type garden versus a home grow gardener?
Oh yeah. That's the biggest difference is flowering time. So when you're running a large scale commercial garden, every harvest matters. Every day of flowering is money. So the way most commercial grows, I would probably say 85 to 90% of commercial grows run 60 days, and it doesn't fucking matter where it's at, it's getting chopped down. And I've seen it across the board. That's why people love Blue Dream, because Blue Dream not going to be done in 60 days, but it's damn close, and there's a ton of bud there by the time it's ready to harvest. So it's like it's one that just throws tons. And to be honest, for a sativa, most places will carry it in a dispensary just because they can put it on the sativa shelf and because it's, all the obvious things that go along with Blue Dream.
Right. And that's actually something to think about, because obviously we know a lot of most sativas, they kind of give you that racy, speedy, uppity high, right? But harvesting a plant too early will give you that same high. You know what I mean? So that's definitely a good way to think about it. I wonder if commercial operations do that.
So here's
in my garden.
Oh, go ahead.
in my garden, speaking from a home grower, I look for milky trichomes, and I look for a percentage. And I don't just look at the top bud. I look at the top bud, the medium bud, the I don't per se check the lower buds.
Uppers, lowers, yeah, the whole plant.
I don't, because in my garden, majority of my lower buds, they all be like larf and shit. You know, I don't know if larf and nice sized buds kind of have the same THC, trichome
No, they
production,
don't. They don't, but they also don't ripen at the same
Right,
time. And that's
right.
why, if I hate to interrupt you, but one thing that I have to say, that's why pruning is so crucial, is because pruning is going to reduce the amount of larf. It's going to put your energy towards the top of the plant.
Yep.
It's going to make all that stuff that takes those extra weeks of just finishing time that drag your plant and your flowering time along. Getting rid of all that larf shit is going to make sure the plant's not freaking out at 9 weeks because it's still not done. You
For
know,
sure.
and it's like that's where a lot of people have herm problems too, is on those lowers, because it's not going to finish, and it's realizing it's not going to finish, and it just starts to freak
Yep.
out.
And so one thing I do is, like I say, I look at mostly the top and the middle of the plant. And what I'm looking for is, I look for about 40 to 55% milky white to amber ratio. Because in my head, like I spoke on last week, I believe that the plant and the trichomes continue to mature as we cut them down, hang dry, or whatever your drying method is.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
so me doing it this way, out of all the other ways I've tried it, cutting it down earlier, waiting until all 60%, 90%, I think that's too long. The type of smoke that I got this time from my garden has been some of the, and these are not my words, these are other people's words that, come over and might enjoy the medication, like,
Right.
so I recommend 40 to 40, 40 to 50, 45 to 55% milky to amber ratio, and then cut.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really disagree with that. So the one thing that I want to say as we talk about ripening, and kind of the first thing is that I've never seen a plant, and this is going to be a hot take, never seen a plant truly finish in less than 60 days, ever.
Mm-hmm.
Ever. Now, I've seen people pull them, and I've seen people convince themselves that they were ready, but I've never seen with my own two eyes a plant that was done, KO, finished,
If you're going to be
putting
honest with
out amber
yourself.
trichs, done at 60 days or less. Now, 60 days is the point where I usually tell most people, most indica dominant strains are going to start looking at you with the look, like I'm getting close.
Yeah.
So that's when you'll start to enter 60 days, enter your 2 to 3 week finishing phase, right? Now, the other thing is, a lot of finishing depends on the type of strain that you're running. So if you're running something that super sativa, keep an eye on the fact that you're probably going to be going 9, 10 plus weeks. The thing about using trichomes as your single determining factor, right? Because ripeness is not just trichomes. Trichomes is one good way to start to tell that you're getting close, right?
Okay.
As you're watching your plant start to finish out, what she's going to do is she's going to start to throw the most density in the last 2 weeks of her life. So if you pull before she's ready to go, you are absolutely not only leaving money on the table, but you're leaving the quality of your finished product on the table, right? Because really what it comes down to is those last 2 to 3 weeks for almost every plant is when she really starts to develop her weight and her resin content. So a lot of that finishing terps, THC content, if you're serious about that, pulling early is going to kill you, because that's when, in those last 2 to 3 weeks, is when a lot of that oil starts to fill in those trichomes, to where a lot of the bud really starts to mature. So you're looking at pistil growth, you're looking at how much have your buds developed, how much are they swelling, do the calyxes all look super swollen? and then you look at something like resin, right? So I always kind of use resin as the number 3, because by the time I'm checking it with a scope, I want to be in that last 2 weeks. I don't even want to bother wasting my time, because trying to put a percentage on the number of what you're seeing under a microscope is kind of tough, right? Because you're only seeing with the best optics, you're seeing a small little patch. So you're really kind of guessing, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And that's what you're doing. You're trying to kind of find a point where you've got the most milky, but hey, amber trikes aren't going to hurt you if your plant's not herming. Letting it go a little further is not going to hurt shit.
So again, like you say, it's a thing with new growers, right? To want to pull early. In my studies, I bring it back to, I think of what's a plant's overall goal. What's a female plant's overall goal? To be pollinated, right? Well, the trichomes that she produces, the stigmas, everything is used for reproduction, right? So when she's not getting pollen, she starts getting frustrated. That's why she swells. That's why pistons start to die. That's why she starts, like you say, dump resin production in those final 2 weeks. So you want to give your plant, again, I know this too, everything out of cannabis that's great comes from a little stress, in my opinion. So I think that's stressing her out a little bit because she's not receiving pollen, and she's going to dump out and give her best in the final 2 weeks after the 60 days, I believe, in my opinion.
So part of what I have to jump in, because part of what you said I agree with wholeheartedly. All of this stuff about what she's trying to do is get bred as hard as she possibly can. That is absolutely true. But I'm a big believer of the less stress, the better. And here's why, right? Because a lot of what you see as a response to stress generally is okay. Like if you're into super cropping, you're into light stress training, little bits of stress are cool.
Right.
But stress at the end of her cycle, especially if your goal is flower, man, it's a tricky balance. So at that last couple weeks, you really have to have a close eye on herms. Number one. Number one. That's the one thing you got to put out there. Like as you get closer to that point, really no matter what strain you're fucking growing, you need to be keeping an eye out for, is she gonna herm? Because most strains, as you enter that last couple weeks, as you start to add stress from flushing, as you start to add, some people change up their lighting cycles at the end and do like a longer night period, or, and so anything you're doing at that point to add extra stress is going to increase the chances that she will self-pollinate. Doesn't matter who the female is.
Okay, I guess let me hone in what I mean by stress. So, yes, you want to keep stress down to a minimum in flower because you want her to focus all of her energy on producing our sweet, massive buds, right?
Sure.
But I meant stress is in the instance of she's not being pollinated. So internally the plant's stressed because that's not quote unquote natural. So, and that's why, again, why some plants, when you tend to take them longer in flower periods, that they do tend to throw natters because essentially we're stressing her. So I believe in the last ditch of those last 2 weeks to try to find the pollen is what she's doing, right? She's going to release all those resin glands and larger trichome heads to try to catch the pollen that will never come, obviously, because we're looking for sinsemilla bud. But yeah, I think it's definitely in new growers, benefit to allow those extra 2 weeks after you look at this plant and say it's done. Give her another 2 weeks. I'm a prime witness to that. I'm used to cutting shit down there.
Man, it's the one thing we've all done. Like any honest grower that's been doing it longer than a cycle or two will tell you, there's at least a couple that I pulled that I should have waited. And I knew I should have waited. And whatever life decision, dictates that you're out of weed or you're just desperate or, you need that money, whatever the situation is, we've all been there. Right. And the truth is that the general joke is when you think you're there, wait 2 more weeks. Now, I've seen people the more I cruise places like Reddit, the more I, just spend time on large public forums, the more I realize that there's a lot of people that see buds on their plant and they're just ready to harvest. It doesn't matter. They don't know what a finished bud looks like. Right.
Down we all are, bro. No, I don't think there's not one grower from me to you to Cap Junkie, everybody.
Yeah.
They all want to pull when they get the glistening and looking all sexy and
Right,
fine,
right, right. And see,
But
that's the
that just comes
that's
with
the thing that
experience. Exactly.
maturity and just age and the grow finally teaches you is that like all the best stuff happens in those last few weeks. And so as hard as it can be, like you're really at that point as you're approaching, you're kind of you've gotten in your mind we're close, right? That's the point where like you need to be looking at your exit strategy, whether that's how your flush looks for the next couple of weeks, what your finishing prep looks like. So if you're trimming, making sure you've got all your materials, making sure you've got space enough to hang all the weed, all of the kind of basic things that are going to go into that. But
Yep.
then again, if your thing is, say fresh pros and extracts, then at that point you need to be making sure you've got bags for harvest, you've got freezers for everything to go in, that you've got vac
Everything
seal
is sterile.
situations. So and it's just a prep at that point, making sure that everything's ready. Think of the things that you don't think you're going to need, get those to extra bags, extra zip bag, whatever it is harvest looks like, whether it's totes, whether you're doing large scale and you need extra totes, you're making sure you have enough, finishing materials, whatever that is. And if you're making extracts, that's where we kind of get into a discussion about like, so when you say, when I say 60 days, there's almost nothing finished.
Mm-hmm.
I can't count how many extract companies are hitting that 60-day mark, and it's all coming down. Now, see, in extracts, what they'll do is they'll pull a little bit early so that you get cleaner color, like your color is lighter. So generally speaking, as you get into kind of later stages and more amber and dark, the hash gets a little bit darker, and there's kind of this custy perception that like light hash is the best hash, which is the most ridiculous thing on the planet. Like
I like that
some of the
dark, black, sticky.
now, I have to throw out one thing that I have said before, because as soon as I say that, somebody will bring up something I've said before, which is anything that's hazelnut or darker, something went wrong. It doesn't matter. The extract, as long as you're not making sift,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. I was thinking
Hazelnut or darker means something went wrong. Now, whether that's something in the extraction process, in the grow process, whatever, and there'll be somebody that's going to tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But there is certainly a color that you go, okay, that's too dark. And there's a shade where tan is great, light yellowish is great, medium yellowish is great. Once we get to hazelnut, somebody either went too hot on their press, they had some problems with spraying in their grow. I can almost tell you what the problem is by seeing your hash.
I tend to enjoy, when I do partake in dabs, the applesauce color. For some odd reason, when I see applesauce, it stimulates my eyes, and it's always been a great experience for me, except for the fact that I was dabbing way too hot and almost putting myself in, Grubbertoss position.
Exception.
Yeah.
Maybe there's an exception I'm not thinking of, but generally speaking, in my experience, yellows are great. Orange, we made tons of citrus. It's kind of funny that like a lot of the citrus stuff, when we did essentially what they call HTFSE, or high terpene full spectrum extract, which is where they separate the pure crystals from the pure terpenes.
Mm-hmm.
When we've seen some certain citrus strains and stuff like that, they're almost like fake orange. Like they almost look like artificial orange. But
Caviar orange.
but I throw a dart, and when I say hazelnut, that's kind of a well thought out, selection, because once you hit that certain point, I can tell you right away, either you're pressing low. If we're talking about solventless, and your stuff is hazelnut or darker, it usually means your rosin press was up too high, or you sprayed late, you had a problem, there was something like that, right?
Wow.
If you're talking about BHO, generally speaking, if it's hazelnut or darker, it's always in the material. It's almost always in the material at that point. Maybe you just left the oven too warm and just made some stupid mistake, but So anyway, once again, I digress. So as we're kind of getting to this final are we there yet point, right? And you've been biting your nails for weeks. You haven't seen any male flowers, so you haven't had to pull anything. You know, you really, for me, I'm not really into a lot of finishing gimmicks. So I've seen people do everything, and this kind of goes back to what you were talking about with a little bit of stress. I've seen everything from people drilling screws into the stalks of their plants. I've seen, you know, the ice bath thing is pretty big, where you've put ice all over your root zone and then pour cold water through your root zone to try and shock the plant.
I've heard 48 hours of darkness. I've never tried it. In my mind, I just always felt like it makes sense. Yeah, so I never tried it. But have you ever tried it?
So I've never particularly done 48 hours. What I will do is I will starve water. So even if I'm flushing, I will do, you know, 2 or 3 days maybe of just dry, to the point where they, like, just before they limp is when you want to pull them, you know, because by the time they limp and all those leaves die, it starts dying too fast, and the whole dying process kind of happens too quickly.
Now, one thing that I do, I think it's unorthodox, and a lot of people like laugh when I say it, but during late flower, I wouldn't even say late flower. I would start around week 5. I'll run my temperatures in my room at like 50, you know, with the lights on.
Dropping your temps is perfectly fine. One thing I did want to say is that I don't know why I do it, and it goes back to the, like, 2 days of dark. That's the only reason I jump back. I do harvest in the dark, and it's one of those things that, like, I don't know why I started doing it. I think it's just because generally moving around in the room is a lot easier when you don't have the lights on, you know, and it's like once you've done 100 harvests, most of us can do them in our sleep. Yeah. So it's like, I've always also heard that generally in dark periods is when the plants tend to move excess nutrients and things towards the root zone. Now, once again, these are kind of, to me, a little anecdotal. I don't know if it really matters. I think that when we talk about a lot of those, like, little tricks and little things like that, you have to ask yourself, are any gains that you're getting worth the increased chances of stress, like of herms? So it's like, that's essentially what you're doing, and any extra stress at the end is kind of, you know, you just die. You're trying to play a game with, like, maybe if I do this, will it increase oil production just a little bit for a 10% more chance that my plant's going to herm from stress? You know, it all depends on how many strains you're running, but how well you know them. But, like, a lot of strains at that point will freak out with, you know, even I've seen people, if somebody just said pee on your plants, that's another one. I mean, I've seen so many different things. You know, I've seen people from Coke. That was another one, Coca-Cola, you know, like extra molasses. We got into a whole thing about flushing with, like, sugars and, like, molasses particularly having excess amounts of, like, micronutrients and stuff. So, like, when you're flushing, using, like, a pure sucrose or something like that will actually affect, you know, help the flush but not stress it, not add more stuff that you have to flush out later.
Do you believe in bloom boosters during flower? Do you think that's anecdotal?
So no. I think it's pretty well established at this point that cannabis in particular is a heavy phosphorus potassium user in flower. Very similar to the way tomatoes kind of grow, in that once they hit flower and once they hit production, they need increased phosphorus and potassium. Now, providing that can be a little tricky. If you're a synthetic grower or a synthetic grower, it's not that tough. You just add a bloom booster, right? But adding anything in a purely organic situation that's going to be that high of a phosphorus load is a tricky thing.
Yeah, if you're doing organics, you got to add that phosphorus early, in my opinion. Like I add it when I was running all organics. I would add it right when I flip, and then around week 4, I'll add another layer of. I was using back guano and seabird guano mix, and
but see, the thing about that is it's really hot, so that stuff can be really hot. So when you put it on, if you're just feeding it directly on, like a top dress or something, it's a little tricky to get it right without burning. So what a lot of people would do is they'll have a veg mix and a flour mix.
Mm.
The two things that are almost certain about cannabis, in veg, all they want is nitrogen. They don't really care about any phosphorus or potassium. You just need enough to get by, right? And micronutrients. That's about it, right? As soon as they flip into flour, it's the exact opposite. It's all phosphorus and potassium with just
Not
a
much
smidge of
nitrogen.
nitrogen to keep
Don't leave it
everything
out.
happy, right? So what a lot of people in organics will do is you'll layer your pot differently. So you'll put stuff in the bottom of the pot, say that's a little bit hotter, and so the middle stuff will be, you know, your regular mix. And then as the roots get lower and start to really fill the pot, which is about late flower, mid to late flower, you'll really start to get the benefits of all that stuff that's kind of mixed a little bit lower. But that's the tricky thing about organics, is that there's no measurement. The only thing you have to go by is the plant. So you have to know your plants absolutely.
Definitely.
Because if something even looks a little bit off, it's like turning a cruise ship with organics. It's a real slow fix, and you better hope you're good at driving.
Right.
Because it's much easier to make the problem worse than it is to make it better. Yeah.
For sure. So
harvest, right?
So we've gotten to the place now where we chopping. What temperatures are you running for your dry room? I physically can do it, like achieve in my space that I use, 64, 55 range, 64 temperature and 55 humidity, and low and slow, just like my barbecue, man. Do it low and slow. And again, I must say, this time was some of the best biomass that I turned up. So that's what I'm at. Where are you at?
So this is another one of those things that, like, having grown weed in different parts of the country, this is a really touchy subject depending on where you live, right? Yep. Now, the common knowledge would be that, like, we grow indoors, we're drying indoors, it's super easy to control. And that is not the case. Growing weed in Denver, Colorado, and drying weed in Denver, Colorado is not the same as drying weed in Atlanta, Georgia. Those two things are not the same. So first of all, knowing your natural humidity, knowing the area that you live in. If you live in an area that's super dry, understanding that your humidity level is going to be entirely based on the heat of your room. So, like, warm air holds more moisture, and that's why the easiest way to reduce your humidity is normally to reduce your temperatures, because cooler air is going to hold less water. So essentially, if you live in somewhere like Colorado, you need to understand that you're looking at a 4 to 7 day dry, right? If you're trying to dry,
4 to
and
7 days.
I'm not joking. I'm not joking with you. That's the normal time. So if you're not supplementing that with additional humidity, which can also be a little tricky because you're trying to dry, you know, adding more moisture to the room is kind of touchy. But yeah, somewhere on the East Coast, let's say you live in, you know, anywhere on the Eastern Seaboard, right? You're looking at 2+ weeks, you know, 2 weeks to get cracker crispy dry stems. That's if they ever dry to that point. If you live somewhere tropical like Florida or on the beach in, say, Virginia, you know, it can be really, really, really tough just to get your initial drying period. What's that?
I apologize for that. Someone just rung my line. Follow advice for 14 days. My first dry here. That was a mistake. Hey, Medieval, where you at? You said 14 days and it was a mistake. Where you at? Yeah,
probably somewhere dry. I'm gonna guess Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, somewhere in the, you know, in the middle of the country, down towards the bottom of the West Coast. Those are usually the driest parts of this country, or yeah, here in the States at least. But yeah, it's really first knowing your area. Somebody else said 60 to 45, which is a good, you know, 60 degrees, 45% humidity. That's not a bad basis. But what you need to understand is what you need to do to get to that point, because that's going to be significantly different depending on where you live. You know, if you live in a super arid area, you may need to figure out a way to supplement humidity, or at least control it so that you're not dry in 3 days and you've just completely killed your terps. Because that's what I saw in Colorado. As soon as I moved to Colorado, I went out there with these ideas that Colorado was one of the epicenters of dank weed, and that it was, it was one of those things that just some of the best weed was coming out of Colorado. Oh man, we lost Mac Blunts. And, what I ended up seeing was that so many people out there couldn't control their temperatures and their humidities at harvest. So much of the weed that would get produced is just power dried. It's either hung on lines or something like that, or just some sort of racks. And it dries so fast that it just literally, there's something to be had for terps drying in a slow kind of controlled way. Because when you do that power dry thing, well, it's great that your weeds now dry in 4 days or whatever, 5 days, but you don't really realize the terp loss that you experience from that fast drying, because terpenes are volatile organic compounds. They want to vaporize. As soon as they hit the air, they want to be gone. So like terps are super fragile. And being that terps are the center of, everything we're doing here, there really is you have to control that initial dry, because if you dry too fast, too quick, you're going to lose all of those terps. Like they're just going to evaporate with all the water. Yeah, and it's going to be gone. So there is kind of a balancing act of trying to dry that waxy membrane that's around your trichome before the terps evaporate out, right?
I'm gonna bring up something too for new growers, and again, this is just what I've learned in my journey, right? So when I was a new grower, I used to wet trim. And I always found that wet trimming, I could never retain terps. It tasted like crap. And so I started leaving leaf matter to protect the buds when I dry. What that did is it created a slower dry for me. It retained the sponginess like I like in my bud. I don't really like crispy bud. I like that 25, 23-day cure. That's my shit. It gets better from there. But that's when I like it, But yeah, so that's one thing I want to mention too. I believe that helps protect the resin glands that's leaving leaf matter on there. And then when you're trimming, try to handle the bud as least as possible, because as you handle the bud, inadvertently you don't even know that you're knocking off trichomes and all type of microscopic shit that you don't even see,
Yeah, so one of the things you nailed right there, that we have to touch on, is wet trimming is a horrible process. First of all, the whole overall structure of how you dry those leaves matter. So there really is a lot of the whole plant drying at the same time matters to those buds drying evenly.
Okay.
Otherwise, they dry on the outside, they're still soaking wet in the middle, and you never know. The other thing is, if you have any interest in making hash, even if it's just sift like keef with your trim, which everybody should be doing if you're growing weed, doesn't really matter. Get a $20-$30 keef box on Amazon or off eBay, and at least be able to make your own sift from your trim. But by doing a wet trim, you definitely damage a lot of those trichomes before they're well dried. And you're just going to end up wasting your trim. So like I said, in our finishing process, the number one goal, whether it's the ripeness of the bud, the dryness of the bud, all we're trying to do is dry the trichomes before the oil escapes. So all of the rest of it is just plant matter. And the reason we're concerned with it is just to make sure it doesn't dry, mold in a jar because it's still wet.
Right.
But on most situations, for the quality of your weed, your goal is to bring that moisture level down in an even way so that your trichomes ripen and harden, that waxy bit around the oil hardens before
They dissipate.
before the oil evaporates.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is once those are fully formed, that's like a grain of sand. It has the toughness of a grain of sand.
Yeah.
You literally have to put force to it to rupture it. So once that waxy bit is dry, it's now you can beat it, you can throw it, you can hit it with a stick. If you've ever
Yeah.
seen those folks in Afghanistan making hash, they whack it with a stick and they're not rupturing glands. It's because once it's dry, you've got a waxy membrane there that's almost as tough as a grain of sand. Like that's how they kind of feel when you get enough of them around. It's like sand.
Yeah, and another thing too, why I don't wet trim anymore, because I do make my own hash products, right? So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, if I'm gonna dry these trichomes and I want them to, become richer, as like you say, I want the same thing for my hash, because I'm not how do you say, flash freezing my trim. Let's be real. I don't have machines to flash freeze. So what I do is I want to cure my trim like I'm curing the
So
bud.
let me interrupt you real quick, just because I know the kind of hash that you make.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to try and freeze your trim to try and make the hash the way that you make it,
Mm-hmm.
all you would do is make a mess. All you do is make a mess, because you can sift with frozen material, but you need that sift to be happening in pretty much a freezer, in pretty much a walk-in freezer.
Yeah.
Like once you freeze that as a live plant, you have to work with it in a pretty much frozen state until it's completely extracted. Because the reason we're trying to harden that wax is because if you even bump that trichome before it's dry, you're going to rupture it. You're going to rupture it. Yeah, and all of that oil is going to go everywhere. So that's the whole process of, like, if you're making sift at the highest levels for dudes that make sift, right, from fresher material, it's always done in coolers, because everything has to be frozen and then extracted and then collected before it's before it's handled.
It disappears. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I believe in the beginning stages of drying, I believe that's when the terpenes are the most volatile and the most unstable. And that's why we want to dry low and slow to get to that point where they're at their ripeness and we don't lose, the terpenes. Because that's, honestly, think about it. That's all we really want. I want to, in my opinion, terpenes are what stores all of the type of cannabinoids anyway.
The rest is just plant.
Exactly. So, I'm riding with you.
One of the things, I kind of lost my thought. Oh, one of the things that you guys talked about on your podcast the other day, and I just want to take a second to plug what's essentially going to be my next podcast we're going to do with a good friend who was just a guest on your podcast, this weekend. But my buddy Josh Zerlin, we're going to talk about hash. We're going to talk about extracts. This is going to be a 2-hour thing. So, but one of the things you guys talked about was live plants, terpene retention, trying to, so essentially as a terpene fiend, as a hash connoisseur, everything is about terpene retention and making sure as much of those terpenes that are on that plant end up in your hash. And that has become an absolute goal. It's become one of those things that's been chased like the Holy Grail. But the process of making the terpiest extracts, making the most flavorful extracts, to me, it's a cause that is so much more important than arguing about 30% THC or high THC. If you want high THC, smoke distillate, smoke isolate. There's plenty of D8 out there. If you just want pure delta cannabinoids, right? But the reality is, for most of us, we kind of have this realization that it's about flavor. So it's about flavor retention. It's about holding as much of that flavor into your finished hash, whether that's rosin, whether that's HCFSE, whether that's, butane, whatever your
What tends to have the
is.
most flavor noise? Because I've never had a diamond, but I see California always talks about their diamonds, and
diamonds by themselves are just pure crystalline THC, right? It's cool. It's a neat novelty, but by themselves, they're one of the most boring things I've ever seen on the planet. It's now, if you take the diamonds away, the other part that's left, if you
The
collect it
star.
properly, that stuff will get you so much more lit than the diamonds by themselves that it's not even funny. Let me put it to you this way. When all we had around was just high terpene extracts and you're getting it pretty much straight off the purge, like shit that's just coming out of the oven, it's done, it's beautiful, it's so loud you can't have a jar and it not just smell everything.
Yeah.
If you do one tiny dab of that, you're going to be so much more high, so much more lit than a big crystal of just pure THC. And it's because the terpenes are everything. High terpene, low THC is always going to be better. Always going to be better. I just want to say it one more time. It's always going to be better than high cannabinoid, low THC. More medicinal. It's going to be more effective.
More
It's
flavorful.
going to get you higher.
More
Done. Here.
flavor.
End of sentence. It's all about the flavor.
I totally agree, man. Like Rasta Jeff say, man, the nose knows. You know, if it's funky, your nose likes it, it's probably going to be good for you. And that's how I start picking my shit now, man. Like, I sniff it, and I close my eyes, and I imagine, how would this feel ingested? And, yeah, man, right now, one of my terpene strains I got, honestly, is probably the bubblegum moss, bro. I believe my homie added the bodega bubblegum to it, and it really took that heavy Afghan plant to a whole new level, man. And I like the density of it. I like the color it brings. There's a few purples in it, but it's just the taste, man. The taste. That's what everyone talks about, is the taste of it. It's so I know it's. I have a guy that comes over periodically, and he medicates with me, right? And he talks about how ever since he started using the bubblegum moss, that it's completely eradicated his anxiety and it's boosted his appetite. This is the first like medical feedback that I've got from one of my strains of an everyday user. And so I take it to heart, man. I was like, if that's what works for you, man, I'll definitely keep it around for you, and I'm happy it works for you. But again, it's kind of like you said, man, flavor is where it's at, man. I believe that flavor is where it's at. Say it again, flavor is where it's at.
Flavor's where it's at.
Taste
Well,
turn.
it's the same thing. It's the same reason that I ride on this little unicycle and I harp and I harp and I harp about heavy myrcene.
Nice.
You know, there are some times where I feel like I'm just beating a dead horse. But what people don't understand is that the more myrcene that's in your weed, the more bioavailable the cannabinoids, specifically THC, are in the body. It helps THC to cross the blood-brain barrier. So essentially, it means that the THC that is there is able to get into your bloodstream easier, and more of it is able to absorb. So even if your goal is just high terpenes because you want more myrcene and you want to get higher off your THC, like I started to notice that when I would give people strains that we had tested that were not 30% strains, mid-20s, high 20s, which to be fair is reasonable THC. But the blackout truffle is a great example of a strain that is it's the number one terpene you're going to see in any terp test is going to be myrcene. And everybody that smoked it, I've had multiple people come back and tell me it's one of the strongest strains they've ever smoked. We've seen tests on it, and I know it's not a 30%er, but I know every plant I've ever seen, the number one terpene on the terp chart, the heaviest one there is myrcene every single time. And so what that has always told me, and that's a consistent thing that I've seen across testing with strains like banana kush, heavy kushes, heavy indicas, that we've seen a lot of these heavy myrcene strains tend to be very heavy on people. So like high is a spectrum, right? We can agree to that, right? So being high does not just mean I'm baked. It can mean anything from, you know, I'm peppy and I'm having a run of my afternoon like a good coffee, or I'm sleeping on the couch, right? So the fact that it's a spectrum, and the fact that so much of our body chemistry, so much of our day, so much of our mood goes into how high we get and how that high affects us, it's so tough to have certain conversations on the nuances of particular strains. But the one thing that I've seen in my personal testing in labs and in experience is that high myrcene, if that's the first terp that comes up on your terp test, probably going to put people to sleep.
So a homie put it to me like this. He was like, THC is like the rocket that propels you in the sky. That's you getting high, right? Think fireworks. The terpenes are like the explosion, right? The glitter, the pretty stuff, right? That gives you like the euphoric feeling or the
It's not
munchy
inaccurate.
feeling. Or it's so again, and myrcene tends to put people to sleep, tends to give you that high, tends to give you that appetite. So that shit is a must in my genetics. When you smoke, for instance, like the caramel grape donuts, you're gonna get fucking grape. I don't give a fuck what nobody say. You're gonna get artificial. I wish I was probably in Chuck E. Cheese somewhere buying candy type grape strand, you know. And it's one of the most amazing strands. Like my wife and I, when we medicate, we go out. It's one of the strands that we just giggly, touchy, feeling, laughing all over each other. It's just an amazing strand, man. Like and I guarantee it's probably myrcene, man. No, I have never got it tested because out here I haven't found
Get in the
anyone.
lab and get it tested. Get in the lab and get it tested, bro. Because it's one of those things that, like, when you start to describe a particular strain and how it affects you and how it affects other people, until we have empirical testing data to see what's there, it's so hard to tell what's affecting you. Especially because in terp tests, particularly terp tests, all they're testing for is terpenes. They're not testing for flavonoids. They're not testing for ancillary. Other kinds of flavor components and things like that are obviously there. Nobody's testing for that broad spectrum type of stuff that I know of. We need to, that's a big push in the industry. We need to start, if we're going to be doing analytical testing, let's be complete about it and at least get a full picture of what's there.
I was a little disappointed.
We're real close on time too, dog. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. I was a little disappointed. We got our King Neptune tested, and they only tested for THC. So it tested at 23% THC, but
that's not
it's
bad.
not bad.
I'm going to be
It's
honest with
not
you,
what I
man.
wanted to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless it's super, super, super terpy, anything in the 20s, like I would say you could have maybe teens if it's just ridiculously levels of terps. But like for the most part, 20s is strong as fuck for most people. It's gonna put most people on their ass. It's just 20s is respectable. Like that's what we don't really talk about in the push to just have high THC. 20s with dank terps is honest to God more preferable than 30 whatever percent.
For sure.
So anyway, man, we're right here at the end of this. I'm going to grab another drink before I hop on with Josh. Tell folks where they can find you, dog.
Yo, you guys can find me on YouTube at Mr. Mac Blunts. You can find my Patreon, same name, Mr. Mac Blunts. Come support. I play Madden and Call of Duty. You can find me on Twitch, same handle, Mr. Mac Blunts. Facebook, you can't find me there. But I appreciate you guys and all the support. Turk, as always, thanks for the alley hoop. We dunked this episode too, man.
Yeah, that was a good one. That one went by quick, man. They always go by good when we have a good, solid direction. So, long story short, I think we got maybe 10 mystery bags from the spring lot left. I don't know how they haven't been scooped up. A couple got picked up, but www.terpfiend.com, terpfi3nd.com. We also have flavor packs. So if you're looking for 2 or 3 gassy strains, you're looking for 3 citrus strains, you're looking for 3 poopy strains, we got them in a pack at a discount for you. If you are following right now, hop on the next episode because we're about to interview one of my homies from Colorado. He's an OG in the extract business. Decorated cups, probably one of the first people to make hash legally in Colorado. Josh Zerlin, he's now with Dessert Strains. So we're going to hop on and chat. I'd love for you to join us, Mac, and just, hop in the chat and listen. We're going to start. The other thing about switching to YouTube is we can start to do more like multi-people because this is horrible for just you and I talking. So I'm trying to add 3 or 4 people. The other thing that we are going to start doing on my Discord is doing like Q&As and stuff over there where we can do 3 or 4 people. It's just at this point a scheduling thing of trying to find when we're not already doing a show and when we can start booking guests and when we can start having people. But we are going to start using Discord more. Go find the Terp Fiend Discord. If you go to my Instagram at TERPFI3ND at the very top of my bio, there's a link tree that has all my links. Go follow my other pages because this is the worst place you can follow me at. All my weed stuff's on Reddit now, and the Discord is where it's going down at.
Yo, I want to give one more shout out to myself, man. You guys follow me. Business is Blooming on Saturdays at 6 p.m. Business is Blooming. I got a special guest this episode. You don't want to miss it, man. Business is Blooming Saturday, 6 p.m.
Yes,
Eastern Standard Time.
that last one was busting. It was awesome.
Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
the last episode with you and Josh and what's your buddy's name?
Pedro.
Pedro. And I may have to be honest, man, I may have Pedro on one weekend because he sounds like he's
Yeah,
been around the biz for a little while.
for sure, man. That would be dope, man. That'll be dope. You'll be on it.
All right, guys, hop on. Give me 3 minutes and we'll jump this on with another guest and we'll go another hour. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Peace.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Mac.